So let's talk for a couple of minutes about some of the theories behind feedback and what they tell us about giving good feedback, right? So not necessarily negative or positive, but just about giving good feedback. And some of the earliest thoughts about feedback came from what's called control theory. And this comes from William Powers, who was actually an aerospace engineer before he became a psychologist. And so we're talking back in the 60s, and he came up with this idea of feedback that really is a kind of an engineering approach to understanding what feedback is all about. And here we have your basic feedback under engineering understanding of feedback, that you have some process and there are inputs to the process and there are outputs from the process. And we have some sensor system that compares the outputs to some set points, right? So there's a comparator in which we compare the outputs to some sort of set point. We give some error message back to the process and we change the process in order to get our outputs closer to our set point, right? And this is basically how feedback works in an engineering system. And feedback here works as, when we provide it to that person, it provides a measurement back to them, and also the comparator, right? And so the idea here is that it provides them with the set point, the goals provide the set point, and feedback provides the measurement and the comparator. Now, feedback in this case can come from the work itself, right? So when we talk about goals, right, we have a certain thing that we need to get towards. Maybe I need to come up with 5 new ideas by the end of the day. That is my goal. I've only come up with 2 ideas. I need 3 more. Right now I have this feedback from the work itself about how far I need to go. It can also come from others, right? So I can get feedback from the leader, or from followers or from others, and just kind of looking around me to try and get some idea of where I sit and what I want to do. Am I achieving my goal or not? So that's what we would need to understand. And look, a piece to this that Powers would talk about is it requires what he called an internal locus of control. In other words, you have to believe that you have some control over the outcome, that my effort, my what I do has an effect on the outcome. Otherwise, you can give me feedback all day long and it doesn't really matter. But this is what feedback theory, what original feedback theory, this control theory would tell us, is that I'd be working towards some sort of output. I'd compare the output to a goal or some other set point and compare with a comparator, and then I would change my behaviors based on the feedback that I was getting in order to get to the output that I wanted. So the question, though, that comes out of this is, does positive or negative feedback work? And if you look at this control theory, if someone is working well, right, if they're actually achieving their goals, then what's going to happen? Well, they might slow down, right? So if we think about it like the cruise control in your car, if I'm actually achieving the speed that I want, then the feedback that I get is, hey, you've achieved that, go ahead and slow down. And that's what the car does. On the other hand, if I have not yet achieved it, right, I get that feedback. Maybe I hit the accelerator, right? I start going up a hill. The accelerator is going to press down as I try to achieve that speed again. So this suggests that positive feedback will actually cause someone to slow down, right? So this is where that idea of, well, I don't want to give them, kudos for just doing their job, because then they're not going to work harder to achieve it, right? Whereas if I'm perfectly willing, and a lot of people who say that are perfectly willing to give negative feedback, because this is going to make people work harder in order to just do their job, right? And so that's what comes out of control theory. Well, if you're like me, that doesn't really sit well, right? And this idea that, when I receive negative feedback, it actually makes me want to work not as hard. And when I receive positive feedback, gosh, it makes me excited to work harder. Well, this gets us into what we call the affective response theory, or the neuroscience related to receiving feedback. And what that tells us is that when we receive positive feedback, it actually gives us good feelings, right? And it actually, it opens up, in technical terms, it opens up our parasympathetic nervous system. It opens up our aperture, opens up our minds, and help us to be more aspirational, to make connections across different things, to want to work harder. Gets back to motivation, be motivated to work on behalf of the leader who's giving me this positive feedback, work on behalf of the organization that's celebrating me. Right. And so in this case, positive feedback makes me work harder, whereas negative feedback gives rise to the sympathetic nervous system, which causes me to have feelings of guilt and defensiveness. It makes me narrow my focus in many ways, and to not be willing to look outside of me, and maybe it makes me, again, it makes me more defensive and not willing to put in that extra work. So it's going to cause me to either give up or slow down. Well, now we have, and this is what psychologists get excited, we have two competing theories about what the possible outcomes of feedback are. Is control theory going to work? Right? Is positive feedback make us work slower, and negative feedback is actually where it's at to make people work harder? Or does affective response theory play the day here? Right? Is it about, positive feedback makes us work harder because it makes us feel good about ourselves, and negative feedback makes us give up and slow down? Well, in the early 1990s, we actually had a competition between these two, and a pair of researchers named Kluger and Denisi actually did what we call a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis is what it sounds like. It's an analysis of analyses, where they went through all of the research that had ever been done on giving feedback. And interestingly, they looked at it and they said, okay, well, and it really was about which works. Is it positive feedback? Is it negative feedback? Does feedback work at all? What's the most effective thing here? And so they did this meta-analysis, and here were the results of it. And so let me explain this chart a little bit. Along the bottom is what we call Cohen's d. This is a statistic that tells us whether or not behavior changed. And this is about the effect size of behavior. It's called D because it's actually not just the change in behavior, but it's the change in behavior divided by the standard deviation of the behavior, the variance in the behavior, how much the behavior varied. And so a 0 of Cohen's d means that there was no effect, right? So you did a thing, you got feedback on it, and then you did the thing again. A 0 would mean no effect. A positive number from Cohen's d means there was a positive effect, that performance got better after receiving feedback. A negative Cohen's d indicates that performance got worse after feedback. So now if we have this, positive means positive, that performance improved. Negative means performance got worse. 0 means there wasn't really any change before and after receiving feedback. So now let's look at this chart. And what we see here, if we look at the middle, we see that the average result, the modal result, the mean result, it's kind of a normal distribution here, is right around 0, which suggests that maybe feedback doesn't matter. Maybe there wasn't a good result here. But the reality is that this was an okay beginning finding, right? Because it suggests that, well, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe we can figure out what puts things on the positive end of the spectrum and what puts things on the negative end of the spectrum. And so as we're doing that, we get this idea that the first question is, okay, well, maybe it's the positive feedback, right? Maybe that's the idea, is this positive versus negative? And so let me look at, and here's the theory, is I would look at all the positive feedback versions, and I would look at all the versions of negative feedback, and I'd see if still we have this, the idea is that maybe all the positive feedback is over here and all the negative feedback is over there. So we did it again and found that it didn't really make a difference. That positive versus negative feedback is not really what this is all about, that it really doesn't get to this idea of a performance improvement. It almost doesn't matter which one you give. They were equally ineffective. Okay, so what did make the difference? Well, it turns out that the difference is about the locus or the focus of feedback and what it's focused on. And really, and this is, I'm going to walk you through this chart. Don't get too scared by this. It's about, is the feedback focused on the task or on the person, right? Is it specific and behavioral, or is it about you as a holistic person? And look, the spoiler alert is that when it's focused on the task, you get good responses. On the other hand, when it's focused on you as the person, that's when you get negative responses. Because here's what happens. If I give you feedback focused on you as a person, you're going to go through a process where you say, first, okay, was this important to me? And if it's like, no, well, you're telling me I'm really cruddy. Okay, I'm going to give up. So, I should probably back up here and talk about what does this mean, this idea of the person-focused versus the task-focused feedback. So task behaviorally focused feedback means that I talk about a specific thing that you're doing. I'm talking about actual behaviors, right? What you did, the words you say, the way in which you say them, the tone of voice is what I mean by that, the facial expressions, the work that you do that has an outcome of some sort. These are task specific, right? Did you show up on time? Did you not show up on time? Did you smile? Did you not smile? Did you say these words? Did you not say these words? Very specific tasks, as opposed to this person focus is about you as a whole, right? So, yeah, great job, right? That's not really very specific. That's just kind of very generic, right? Or the opposite of that, like, oh, you're a real dirtbag, or you have a real performance problem, or you have an attitude problem, or things aren't going well, right? These are all just kind of focused more generally. So I often tell a story to kind of illustrate this. I know I'm going a little long here, but I want to tell this story because I think it's a good illustration of this. So when my daughter was a teenager, she had a summer job. And she worked at an ice cream store. And at this ice cream store, it turns out that there's this pecking order. And when you first start working there, you're scooping ice cream, and that's great. But then, once you've kind of succeeded at scooping ice cream, you get promoted to selling the candy. And when that goes well, then you get promoted to selling or to making waffle cones in the window. And if that goes well, like, I don't know, I guess you could move on. Oh, you move on to apples, to dipping caramel apples, and then you move on to kind of other jobs. But there's this pecking order and promotion system. So my daughter was working there, and she did well. She went up from scooping up to working the candy. But then she kind of couldn't get past that. She couldn't get into the waffle making line, which is where you wanted to be. And people were getting promoted higher, faster than her, who had been hired after her, and especially her little sister. And you can imagine that didn't go so well. So, she came to me. She's like, Dad, I don't know what to do here. I don't understand. I can't get promoted. And so me, being organizational psychologist, like, oh, here's my opportunity. You should seek feedback, right? So go ask your boss, right? Ask the manager, what's going on here? Why not? And so she did. And the manager, told her, well, here's the problem is those jobs about making waffle cones and stuff past that, they're really about sales jobs. And the thing is, you're just not really a people person. So I don't think you do well in those jobs. So yeah, it's going to be hard for you to move up. You can imagine the effect this has, right? This is very person focused. You are not a people person. So not only is it negative, that's a part of it, but the more important part here is that it's about who she is as a person. And look, God love her. I love my daughter, but she will be the first one to tell you she's not really a people person, right? She's very task focused. She wants to work on the task, get the thing done. I don't need to engage in conversation in order to scoop ice cream. I don't understand. And so she came back very upset with this. And the words that came out of her mouth were, but Dad, I'm not a people person. I can't change that about myself. So how could I possibly continue on it? And honestly, she quit a week later and went on to another job. And honestly, went on to another retail customer-focused job where she excelled and did really, really well, frankly, because she had different management. So this was this focus on the person, right? And so the question is, was this important? Well, no, it's just a stupid summer job. I'm out. Now, if it is a really personally important task I want to continue to work on, then a couple things can happen, right? We can actually get, if it's a very simple task, right? So if you have a very simple task and I come up and just say, good job, right? Well, then you're going to work harder and you'll feel this, oh, good. I have this affective response, I'll work harder. Or if I'll say, hey, you're falling behind, you need to catch up, right? Then, or that even might be a little too behavioral for this example, but you're not doing a very good job, do better. Right? Again, very kind of person focused. If it's not a very complex task, then, you will work harder in that case. But if it is complex, right? So now I have to put more cognitive effort into this. Well, I've shut down those parts of your brain that are going to do this cognitive imagining because I've given you this negative feedback about yourself. And I haven't really told you what you need to do. And so your performance actually goes down in this case. So what could that manager have done differently? Well, instead of giving this, you're a person, you're just not a people person, maybe focusing on the tasks involved, right? And maybe even setting some goals for personal improvement, like about, well, this really is a sales job. It requires people to smile and converse with customers in order to get them into the store and try and sell more stuff to them. And And honestly, you haven't done very well in those particular areas, but maybe we can work on those, right? And so let's talk about tasks. Let's in fact set goals around it. Now we're getting to that performance management cycle. Let's work together to define some goals about getting better at these things. And now we're going to when a customer comes in, here's what we're going to work on. It's a tourist town, so it's always good to engage customers, ask them where they're from. So what I want you to do is set a goal to ask each customer, when a new customer comes in, you one, smile, and then two, ask them where they're from. And that's all you have to do right now. We're just going to work on those discrete set of skills, and we're going to work on that, and you're going to get better at that. And now I have something. Now here's something I can work on. This is just behavior I can do. Look, maybe I'm faking it. Maybe it's going to be hard, but this is something I can do better at, right? And so now when I get that task feedback about that particular task, right? Oh, you smiled when that customer came in, and when you did that really made them make a bigger sale, or made them feel good about coming here, and it's going to make them come back again. Good job, keep that up. Or we talked about smiling when you came in, and so when a new customer comes in and you didn't smile this time, even though you did ask them where they were from, you didn't do it while smiling, right? What can you do differently there? And now we're going to have, and so the impact of this, if we follow that, right, we have the task, the positive versus the negative. When we get the positive feedback, if again that's task focused. Now, we'll set even higher and bigger goals, because we've built our self-efficacy. We know that we can achieve a thing. We're going to do even better. On the other hand, when we get negative feedback, and if it's task focused, this is going to bring us about to increased effort and help us to work even harder. So look, that's feedback intervention theory. It's a little bit complex, I know, but here's the takeaways that I want to have for you. And again, I know I'm going long on this one, but these are the important takeaways here. First, feedback has to be truthful and it has to be upfront. We don't do it behind somebody's back, because then it doesn't work. We focus on behavior, words, body language, tone, facial expression, work product. These have to be observable. An outside source needs to be able to say, yes, this is the thing that happened, right? We don't give feedback about a person. We don't give feedback about their attitudes, about things they don't know, right? I can't read your attitude. I don't actually know if you're lazy. I don't know if you have a bad attitude. Look, I'll tell you, if anybody ever tells you you have a bad attitude, the only correct response is, no, I don't. Because you can't, there's no defense against that. You don't know. Now, you can give me feedback about actual behaviors from which you infer a bad attitude, right? When I never smile, it makes you think I have a bad attitude. That's different. Not smiling is a behavior, right? Not engaging with my friends, sleeping in class, right? That's different from being lazy. Not turning assignments in on time. That's different from being lazy or not caring enough. I can't tell whether or not you care enough, but what I can tell is whether or not you turn something in on time. So it's focusing on actual observable behaviors, not on thoughts that people have. Feedback should be specific and frequent, right? It goes back to that idea of fast goals, that we frequently talk about goals and how we're doing on them, right? And how we're moving towards them. We want to refocus, and I'm going to get into this in a later discussion. We want to refocus on future performance. We don't want to really dwell on on past performance, actually, whether it's positive or negative. We want to dwell on someone's future performance. Remember, I said at the very beginning of the lecture, feedback is about the future. It's about improving someone's performance, not about the past. The past is just data that we use to help us give feedback about future performance, but it's really about the future. So we need to focus there. We do want to build people's confidence, help them to believe that they can achieve those higher results from this feedback. And look, here's my absolute bottom line. Feedback must come from a place of love. And I absolutely mean that in the strongest terms. If feedback comes from a place of anger, if feedback comes from even a place of hope, if feedback just comes from anywhere but really loving a person and wanting them to do better, it's gonna fall flat. Feedback has to come from a place where we genuinely want improvement of someone, right? So if you can't give, and look, yes, we should give feedback frequently and as soon as possible after an event. The caveat to that is, if you're giving feedback that's not coming from a place of love, people can't hear it. It's not going to work. It's not going to help. It's only going to ignite all of those feelings of defensiveness and guilt. And then people just can't hear and they can't see their way to self-improvement. So it needs to come from this place where you genuinely want someone to do better. It has to come with love in your heart, that it comes from this relationship that you've built and this trust that you have between you. And I can tell you that the person to whom you are giving feedback, they will smell it out in a heartbeat if it's not coming from a place of love, and they will shut down and they will not do as well. So if you really want feedback to work, it must come from a place of love.